Welcome. Where I am, it looks like a very gloomy day. I hope in Westport it's nicer. We'll just wait a few more seconds. Welcome, and thank you for coming to this week's business event provided by the Westport Library. I'm Ellen Janpole, and I'm the business librarian at the Westport Library. Before we start, just to give you a basic ground rule, if you want to ask a question, please post the question in the chat box, and we will give it to the speaker at the end of the program. Relationships are the background of business success. Rob Thomas has proven that who you don't know is costing you. In his book, Who Do You Need to Meet?, Rob Thomas unlocks the secrets of his trademarked Rob Thomas method of networking to provide people with an easy, logical, systematic, and actionable process for efficient, successful networking. Rob earned his Bachelor's of Science degree in Corporate Communications from Ithaca College, and thereafter participated in the college program at Walt Disney World. One of his major accomplishments is that Rob is an Eagle Scout. Over the course of his career in business development and relationship management, he perfected the process of turning "it's nice to meet you" into an interesting, productive, and strategically focused method for cultivating business. The principles work for individuals who need to sell, as well as for those who need to gain support from stakeholders within a corporation. Rob teaches you how to network like never before. He is a speaker, author, coach, consultant, and professional networker with the aforementioned book and another on the way in the third quarter of 2021. He is the president of Rob Thomas USA, which helps professionals network nationwide. And now, here is Rob Thomas speaking on Who Do You Need to Meet? Thank you, Rob.
Ellen, thank you very much. I really appreciate that entree. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Rob Thomas, and I teach people how to network. I do that intro right there to have a little fun. You may or may not recognize it as Rob Thomas, the lead singer of Matchbox 20, getting ready to do the song Smooth with Carlos Santana, of which he won a Grammy Award back in the year 2000. I often get asked, are you the singer? Are you Rob Thomas, the singer? And I have to let them down and disappoint them that I'm not. But I am here this afternoon. I want to thank the Westport Library as well as Ellen and all the staff there for letting me talk to you this afternoon about what it is I do, which again is teaching people how to network. You may recognize this slide from a famous movie called Glengarry Glen Ross, which usually talks about in sales, always be closing. I've had a little author's license with it and changed it to always be networking. The philosophy being that I want you to think about all those different types of business interactions that you have and who you interact with on a daily basis, weekly or monthly, but also to think about all of your different contacts of your network. Now, today we're going to talk about the business side of life, not necessarily as much family and friends. However, I want to tell you a story. As Ellen so eloquently stated, I did go to Ithaca College years ago, and when I was there, I was in a fraternity. One of my fraternity brothers named Marty and I have kept in touch over these last several years, and we've checked in with each other about our family and our friends. And it's been a while. It's been over 30 years since we were in college. Yes, I am that old. That's how I lost all the hair. But we've kept in touch, but we've really never talked much about business and what you're doing for work and I'm doing for work. Marty has long been a IT or information technology executive in or around New York City, working for the likes of Morgan Stanley, Dow Jones, and even Cigna Insurance. And about 2 years ago, he was lucky enough to be donned one of the positions at Amazon Web Services out of New York City. And interestingly enough, he then called me and he said, you know what, I need you to come down to the city. I'm like, well, for what? Are you hurt? Is somebody sick? You know, what's happening? No, I need you to come down and help me. I go, help you? Like, help you in what? Well, in my business, because I've just achieved a new position there. And the number one requirement that they make, that they literally put on the job description, was to increase your business networking skills with the account that we give you. Now, being an IT executive, he knew all those different things about servers and wires and terabytes, but he didn't really know about business networking because, of course, if you Google networking, you will immediately probably see the result for computer networking with servers and drives and wires and things. So I went down and we talked about what he was going to do to increase his relationships. Granted, this was a over 30-year relationship that I had attained way back in college. And now he needed me to help him in business. So he retained me for a little while on his own, and then he introduced me to his new boss. Then they retained me for a little while, and then that was bubbled up the scale where I received a very healthy contract from that company last year. Again, the point being is that I always want you to think about networking, no matter where you are. Now, I'm going to talk about a couple of things today that are probably going to set you a little askew. You're going to be like, oh, that's kind of different. Networking is hard. It's difficult. However, I submit that it is very simple. So if you really kind of listen a little bit, kind of open your mind like a parachute, right? Parachutes only work when they're open. You've heard it before. I'm going to talk about a couple of things today that are going to probably be a little bit non-traditional on the way you've thought about business networking. So, but first we want to get to and talk about really what I consider the 3 keys to success. The baseline to understanding about how to conduct ourselves in business. First, you have to be competent. You have to really know your craft. No BS here. You really have to be able to understand your subject matter. Pick it, niche it. Don't be too broad, but you really have to know how you want to be able to talk to others about it. And that gets to the second key, which is about being confident. You have to be confident with being able to explain that and communicate that to others who you meet. Now, I didn't say cocky, I didn't say egotistical, I said confident. So I know my craft, I'm able to communicate that well. Hi, I'm Rob Thomas, and I teach people how to network. A nice, confident, simple, short statement. But finally, I submit the greatest key to success in business, and long has been held, is to be connected. We have to be able to understand where the pieces fit, to connect the dots, to really understand, excuse me, how people come into our lives, leave our lives, but on a business perspective, where they fit in the overall puzzle. You've often heard the phrase, I'm sure, to be a mile wide. Oh, he's a mile wide, an inch deep. So he probably knows everybody on the planet, but he doesn't know them that well. Dr. Miser even goes one step further in his B&I philosophy, and he talks about you want to know those different people and how well do they know you. So I take the phrase of you want to be a mile wide, but you also want to be a mile deep. You want to invest in those different relationships that you have out there. Well, so now how do you do that? You know, throughout my career, I've done different types of business development positions, but it was only when I started at the Greater New Haven Chamber of Commerce that I learned to really kind of figure out how to teach people to network and network efficiently and effectively. And there is a way to do it. And so what I have created is what I affectionately call the Rob Thomas method system of networking. It's pretty straightforward, and it breaks out into these 4 basic quadrants. First, we need to identify our network. Who are those individuals, using maybe LinkedIn as a guide to be able to figure out those different people we're connected to? Who is it that would make a top 10 list for us, as an example? Identifying those different professionals who we need to meet. It's by no accident that I coined the title of my first book, Who Do You Need to Meet? Because when I was at the chamber and people would give me their money and their applications, I would ask them that question: who is it you need to meet? Going for the specifics versus the 3 deadly people who we don't know, which are anybody, everybody, and somebody. The second portion of networking really gets at maximizing that relationship. How do you do that? What are the specifics that I have found successful to be able to really maximize that professional networking relationship? The third component talks about refining it. You know what? This whole thing about networking and I've got to really have everybody like me is a fallacy. It's not going to happen. You can't make people like you. You can't make people do stuff for you. The only control you have is of yourself. You can't make others do stuff for you. However, in the process of my method, I'm going to teach you a little bit more about how to really get in the good graces of people. Not necessarily like you, but to at least respect you. And then finally, we need to talk about nurturing that relationship that you have started or that you've built. What's your plan? You've got to think that type of relationship through. Are you just going to text them as some kind of follow-up, an email, a LinkedIn message, a Facebook message? I submit that you've really got to think about a plan on how you're going to work with these different folks. So if we look at identify, here's something I want to challenge you with. I want you to think about your network using LinkedIn as a guide, and I want you to think about those individuals and who you're connected with that might fit into a top 10 list. Maybe that would be a list of people that you could call at 3 in the morning, or that you could ask to have a Zoom call with, or that you would be able to meet in a diner for a coffee. And they're not going to ask you why. They're just going to say, No, sure, Rob, absolutely. I'm available Friday at 2. But how do we do that? How do we class those people? People kind of criticize me a little bit for this step, and they're like, well, I can't keep tabs on everybody. Well, let me help you. Everybody's keeping tabs on you. So quietly, we can figure it out as well. If you think about your network, think about it in a rating scale of 4 different types of folks. 1 is a new network. Number 1 is a new network contact. So if I haven't met you before, we're not connected on LinkedIn, you and I today are 1s to each other. A 2 is a former colleague or contact, or maybe an alumni from college or high school, or even grammar school. I connected last year with a lady who I went to grammar school with, who she and I have now connected in a professional basis to figure out how she's going to find that next job. Always be networking. Number 3 is really a one-way relationship. You know who these folks are. As you're scrolling through your LinkedIn list, you know these different people on there. You really do more for them than they do for you, or maybe vice versa. You have to really take a hard look at those different relationships. Are they a 1, 2, or a 3? The ultimate objective is to make them a 4. You do just as much for them as they do for you, and vice versa. It's a mutually beneficial relationship. Now, I didn't say that both of you sell to each other. I said it's a mutually beneficial relationship. Maybe they make referrals or introductions for you, and you do for them. But this isn't about selling them or them selling you. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a mutually beneficial relationship. Well, so then how do we maximize that? We want to be careful, like I said before, the 3 people that we don't know. When we ask them who we need to meet or they need to meet, we want to make sure that they are specific and watching out for these 3 people who we don't know, because we can't help them in that regard. When we maximize them, I want you to think about a process, be it either on Zoom or when you meet them in person. It's a process. It's a simple process that I've developed, and I want you to use it too. If you're going to meet with a contact, no matter where you are on the rating scale, probably either a 1, 2, or a 3, you're going to sit with them and have a Zoom meeting or maybe a coffee at a diner. What I want you to do is take a notepad, write their name, date, and time on the top. And then underneath that, using LinkedIn here as a guide, I want you to go to because you're connected with them, I want you to go to their professional profile and identify 3 things on that profile that you find kind of interesting. I didn't know Rob worked at Walt Disney World, as Ellen had told you. I didn't know Rob went to Ithaca College, she told you. And she also told you that I'm an Eagle Scout. So these different kinds of pieces, you have to search for a little bit, but not that hard. And you can write them down at the top of that paper. So we're going to talk about LinkedIn as well as a really good way to be able to work through our professional network. Now, I'm not a LinkedIn coach. I think it's a phenomenal company and process, and it's a great way to be able to connect with those professionals who we know and respect. There are a lot of people out there that do teach LinkedIn as a business process. I happen to use a coach in the name of Mark Halpert, and he helps me make sure that I focus and I pay attention to telling people my why. Why is it that I'm doing what I'm doing? A lot of people, when they use LinkedIn, they make a grave mistake. Remember, we talked about the rating scale, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Well, how are we going to start that kind of connecting with those 1s? How do we find those new people? Well, I really want to be connected to Rob over there. Well, I'll just click the connect button on LinkedIn and send him an invitation. You are now hereby today at 12:20 on Eastern Standard Time officially indoctrinated to never, ever do that again. If you ever send a request in LinkedIn or an invitation to connect with another human, not an animal, a human, I want you to make sure you always use the personal note or add a note feature. do something kind of creative about maybe why you want to connect with them, or you want to refer to another colleague who you may know in conjunction with them, but always send a personal note when you're doing an invitation. Other pieces about LinkedIn are important are having a very good digital headshot, as well as going through all those other different pieces of LinkedIn that really kind of tells your why. And somebody like Mark Halpert can teach you how to do that. And I fully endorse that you look him up and ask him those questions. But I am not a LinkedIn coach. But I use it as a productive guide to be able to process and develop a business network. So it's a very important piece of the process. So again, remember now we're meeting with that individual. We've done the work of putting their name on the top. We're either meeting them over Zoom or in person now. We're going to write those 3 things underneath their name. Are they conversation starters? Sure. But I didn't tell you to put 4. I didn't tell you to put 8. I told you to put 3 interesting things about them using LinkedIn as a guide. Now, if they don't have a LinkedIn profile, or they have a website, or they're not as full on LinkedIn, yeah, you could Google them. That's fine too. But I want you to be prepared. This is about doing good research. This isn't about showing up and throwing up on your contact about what it is you do. And I'll tell you more about that in a minute. But this is about doing good research. So now we're going to have the meeting. Now, before the meeting, we've done this kind of research. We've identified 3 things. We know where they fit. We've invited them with a personal note. And when we sit with them in person or on Zoom, it's about having good research and being prepared. Yes, I'm an Eagle Scout. What's the MO of an Eagle Scout? To be prepared. And you can be too. Remember, I said networking can be difficult. The only reason why it's difficult is because it involves the word fear, because you don't really know anybody. And so we're all scared out of our mind by the fact that we don't know those different people. But this is a process. If you follow this process and introduce yourself to good people, like I'm going to teach you now, I'm going to guarantee you 1 of 2 different types of solutions are going to happen. Now, again, we're using in virtual right now, as I'm talking to you, we're going to start to break out and do live meetings as well. The point of this slide is not to advertise for Zoom. The point of this slide is to set yourself up like you would be prepared for a regular in-person meeting. Gentlemen want to have a collared shirt and a jacket, maybe, unless it's Friday, and then you could be casual. But the idea is that you want to be presentable, not just here virtually, but also like you would be in person, because first impressions always matter, right? You never get a second chance to make a first impression. You've heard the adage 16 different times if you've heard it once, and it's true. Just like having a very good professional digital headshot for your LinkedIn is important. On that piece of paper now, be it either virtually or in person, we've gotten to the diner or the coffee shop or the restaurant 5-10 minutes early. We've written these different things down, maybe in our journal, but now I want you to write down the left-hand side of this piece of paper, this acronym, which I'm sure I grabbed from somewhere in my 20 plus years of being in development. But who cares? It works for me. If you come back to me after having a meeting, I'm going to ask you, did you form them? What was it like when you formed that contact? And it's fairly straightforward. Family, occupation, recreation. It used to be money or message. I've transformed it into meat. Now, when we sit there, we're not going to say, well, tell me about your family. No. But you might want to ask, so where's home? I had a lady when I gave this talk at the Westport Library a couple of years ago. Phenomenal lady, and a question that came out of her, which was, hey, I get that, but where did you grow up, Rob? And it's interesting because I'm coming to you from Milford, Connecticut, but I grew up in Fairfield, Connecticut. And that was a neat question she asked me. The second is occupation. Now, these letters are probably going to go out of order when you meet with your person, because the idea is this is about business. So you'll probably start with O and then maybe go to F, And then you go to R, you might even miss R. Marty has long had trouble with kind of the R in the discussions, but he's figured out how to work it into the discussion. When you're on O and talking about their occupation, using LinkedIn as a guide again, you want to see about where they've been, where they've traveled, and where they've been most recently. Now, if they're out of work, obviously, they haven't been in an employment position, but if they are employed right now, and it's over 24 months, my rule of thumb is, well, you've been there a couple of years, you obviously must like it. It's a tee-up, open-ended question to figure out where they are in their occupation and what they're trying to do and accomplish. R stands for recreation. Now, most people are going to default to their family and their kids and their dogs and their pets and their snakes and their, boa constrictors and snake. But that's not what I'm looking for here. What I want you to think about is, what do you like to do for fun? Now, this is what you're going to be asking your contact. This is why we ask these questions, because we want to find out a little bit more. Now, we don't spend the entire time on this, but we want to know what they do for fun. Do they like to golf or to ski or to swim or yoga? I had one lady who loved macrame. She had the whole big setup and everything. Well, so now you're probably asking, though, well, wait a minute, why am I doing all of this research? Why am I asking all these questions? I'm confused. Remember my slide earlier? Keep your mind open. Well, I developed these questions and I developed this process for one very specific reason. I had a dear friend of mine who I met way back in the 2000s, who has traveled and seen me in all different types of walks of different positions and careers. And Brian and I sat down and we had a meeting at a diner. And I was on one of my different sales positions. I sat down and we ordered our coffee. It was a breakfast meeting. He loves his breakfasts. I think it was the Galaxy Diner, and is that Bridgeport or Trumbull? And he said, all right, Rob, so what are you selling me today? How do you get out of that? Like, I don't really think I had an answer. I think I probably stumbled over it and I was like, oh okay. Well, I'm with this company now. Well, wait a minute. How do you get out of that? He taught me a very important lesson, that I was always showing up and throwing up to my contacts. Every time I go to a chamber business after hours, dear friend of mine, Jennifer, always said, yeah, I didn't want to tell you this, but since you asked, every time I saw you at one of those things, I'd run for the door. I'd run for the door because I knew you were always pitching. You're always selling. You're always pitching me. You're always trying to close me. I said networking. I didn't say always be selling. I didn't say always be pitching. So I had to think about that. I had to really change. And that's what's really hard about networking, because we always want to tell other people who we are and what we're doing. We always want to show up and throw up, give them our card like a card dealer and throw it in their face. But I submit, like it happened to me, that we should change and flip that. You start asking the questions of your contact, and this is how you do it. It's a simplistic way to ask them about them, and you ask them about them first. Finally, in form, it's all about who do they need to meet. It used to be money or message, but that was just too vague. And people would tell me, oh, I don't know, I just want to meet anybody, everybody. So, it was too vague. With this question, it's about who they need to meet. Now, they could still give you those 3 people that we don't know, and then it's a challenge, but you've at least asked the question. You've asked the question of them. Now, the whole idea about this is that you've done the research, you've established credibility, you're the one asking the questions, and I'm assuming you're doing it with authenticity and because you genuinely want to. But if you follow this process, something very powerful and important that I have coined is, or should, I should say, going to happen. And I call it the organic switch. See, remember when I talked about we can't make people like us? We can't make people do stuff for us. However, if we flip the script and we start talking to them about them, asking good questions about them first, before we even talk about us, and we do that with, authenticity because we want to, we ask them these simple questions. I submit that they are then going to just stop you and they're going to say, wait, okay, enough. And this might even happen if it's a good contact in the first 2 or 3 minutes. But most especially if it's a new contact, it'll happen maybe in the first half hour as you're sitting there, or maybe sooner, who knows? And they're going to start asking you about you. Because organically, they have now felt that you've done the research, you've established your credibility, you actually care about them. And they're going to be happy about that. They're going to be impressed. They're probably going to say something like, wow, you really did your homework. How many times have we heard that phrase when we really have, but we don't do it often enough? So organically, they really felt like they want to ask you something. And that's how you promote them from a 1 to a 3 to a 4, or a 2 to a 3 to a 4, or maybe they jump right to a 4. Remember, I talked about identifying your network and establishing a top 10 list. The ultimate objective being you have a top 10 list of 4s in your network. Is it hard to do that? Yeah, it could take a little while, but nothing worth it is ever easy. And if you follow this process and wait for the organic switch, I submit that that promotion up the scale, that rating scale that I have, will make you a better, more effective professional, a better networker, so that you know more about each other. Now, there is bad news. There is bad news. It may not happen. The organic switch just may not occur. Then what do? They may talk at you for like an hour, and this happens, okay? Well, then you need to make a decision. This goes to the refining portion of my method. What do you want to do? Now, some people say, well, that's a really good contact. I really want to hold on to them. Okay. I give you 3 opportunities in 90 days, and they may be all different, by the way. Different, you do an email, you might do a text, you might do a phone call, all these different kind of methods, but do 3 different types of touches, as sales world terminology would call it, in 90 days, and figure out whether or not this organic switch occurs. But I don't lead with this. I don't lead with saying 3 times in 90 days, because this is about being efficient with your network and effective. If the organic switch doesn't occur, you can't make them like you. You can't make them ask you a question about you. It's in their DNA on whether or not they give a And since it's being recorded, I'm not going to be profane. But you can't make them like you. But if you do the good research and you ask good questions about them, I really do think that the organic switch is going to occur, and then you've got a good, effective relationship. But then what? What do we do after that? Let's say the organic switch has occurred. What do you do after the meeting? Most people always, whether I'm live or virtually, I give this talk, they most always will say, oh, I sent them an email or a text right after the lunch or the coffee, and I just said, thank you. Yeah, okay, so now you're like everybody else. Congratulations. You're like everybody else. Is that what you really wanted to do? Is that why you're sitting here listening to me talk? Because you want to be like everybody else? I don't think so. I think deep down in your DNA, you want to be just a little different, because you've got to make this work. How do you make this work better than you did before? Well, you're going to start with a handwritten thank you note. If you Google the success of a handwritten thank you note, I challenge you to find under 1,800 articles that are written about the success of a handwritten thank you note. Now, if you come back to me and do that, okay, that's fine. We'll have a conversation, but I really don't think you're going to find it. Because how can 1,800 articles really be wrong? When's the last time you wrote a handwritten thank you note? When's the last time you got one? And if you got one, did you keep it? I've kept all of my handwritten thank you notes. I think I'm going to do a collage, but I don't know if my wall is big enough. Handwritten thank you note. You send a handwritten thank you note to them, identify a piece that you talked about in your lunch or your coffee. You put one human card in there, can either be a business card or your human card, because we've all got different cards, I'm sure. Name, phone number, email, that's all you need. You throw it in there, you send it to the ether, and think about following up with them. Now, I take that in my business one step further, and I use a company called Send Out Cards. They are now a one of 5 different division of a bigger company called Greener Still, which is fine. But I found this company a couple of years ago because the handwritten thank you note is fine, but I wanted to do just a little bit more, just a little bit. I mean, I teach this stuff for God's sakes, right? I got to do just maybe a little bit. I don't have to spend all my money, but I do want to do something a little bit different. So if you're interested in knowing more about this, this allows me to create a card and then maybe even send a treat with it. And what that does is that bubbles me up even higher to them in my network to know that I actually really do care. And I want them as a part of my network and to really participate and understand. So what is your follow-up? The 4th quadrant of my method. What is your process? Do you have a process that you use to be able to follow up? I wanted to meet a gentleman. Back then, he was an executive vice president of a very successful manufacturing company. His name is Roger. Still exists today. Wonderful man. It's on LinkedIn. He's had his whole LinkedIn persona and everything crafted by Mark, who I use. But back then, I wanted to meet him. He was the guy you would see at the chamber meeting where everybody was huddled around and he was all kind of kept and perfect. Like, who was that guy? I want to meet that guy. So I sent him an email. I said I wanted to buy him lunch. And so we went to lunch in New Haven. And back then, I didn't have my process or a journal or notepad or anything. All I had was a simple business card. So I took my business card. I wrote his name at the top and the date and the time on the back. And then I wrote 3 questions on the back of it. Now, he didn't have a LinkedIn profile at all. I had to really kind of go to their website or the website of the company he was with. And I really had to kind of do some really good research. I took that business card and I put it down next to me for lunch. And so we had a very nice lunch. And I started to ask him and look down and ask him a question about him. And that would be neat. And then I'd look down again and I'd ask him another question. Now, granted, I've never met this man. I never met this man, never sat with him before. I didn't really even have any kind of method. I was just like, I think we ought to do some research and write some stuff down. Nobody told me how to do this. My father didn't tell me. I didn't have a mentor or a coach or any of this stuff. I kind of developed it because I wanted to make sure that I was going to be a good Eagle Scout and I was going to be prepared, but just kind of jot down a couple of notes. We get halfway through the lunch and he stops me. Now, remember about the organic switch and forming them, and hopefully we're lucky enough that they'll stop you. That's what happened with me and Roger. He stopped me cold in my tracks. He's like, okay, stop. Now, I just met the guy. I don't want to take him off, but I just met the guy. I'm like, oh, I got something on my face. What, my glasses wrong? You know, do I have hair out of place? He goes, no. What is that card over there? You keep looking down at that card like it's your cheat sheet. Like, what is that? What is it? Oh, this? Well, it's just a card. And I told him why I had it and put his name on it. I put his name and date on the back of my card. And the reason why I did that is because at the end of the lunch, my intent was to give him my business card that had the questions so that he would remember me. Really? He said. Really? You did that? Yeah. Why? Well, I wanted to make sure it was a productive lunch, and you're a big wheel in New Haven, and I didn't want to come off, like, hi, how are you? What can you do for me? I wanted to kind of do some research and respect you. Really? Yeah. Well, let me tell you something. In all the 35, back then it was 35 years or so of business, I've traveled all around the world. I've been in all different types of distributors and nations and countries and all this. Out of all of that, I have to tell you that this is the most productive lunch I've ever had. Please continue. I was flabbergasted. I was like, oh my God, I mean, how cool is this? To this day, we are still very close, trusted advisors and colleagues to each other. The point of that being is that is how I coined, developed, and now have hopefully service marked soon, the organic switch. Because organically he felt and knew that I cared enough about him. And that's what I want for you. I want you to be able to do some good research on your contact before you meet them. I want you to meet them on Zoom or in person, and I want you to go prepared. I want you to have those 3 things. I want you to write form on the left-hand side. I want you to just jot some notes so that when they show up to the meeting, you're prepared and you just start to ask them some questions. Now, it can be a little interview-ish. Somebody said the other day, it was like I was interrogating him or something, like, whoa. I didn't mean that. I just want to ask you some good questions. And of course, the organic switch occurred then. But then they asked me about me. And that's what I want. That's what I have seen, experienced, and developed as an effective, profitable business networking relationship. And that's what I want for you. I want you to have interactions just like I did with Roger, not like the kind I had with Brian, but I want you to have the organic switch happen for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rod. Do we have any questions? I don't see any questions in the chat right now. Except that Mark Halpert did say that it was gloomy in Fairfield in response to my comment about gloominess. Thank you, Mark. Are there any questions? Okay. There's one person who wanted to know, is there any advice on the direction of the 3 questions on your card? Don't know what that exactly means. Do you understand that, Rob?
Yeah. Well, I think what it means is when you are trying to figure out what those 3 items or questions would be, they can be anything from mutual connections you have in common, because you're using LinkedIn as a guide. Oh, I didn't know he knew Scott or Deborah. You could write those 3 different mutual connections. And then when you start your meeting, you might say, well, so how do you know Scott? And that'll start kind of a dialogue. Or it can be those different types of items like, oh, I didn't know he was an Eagle Scout. Oh, I've got 3 kids who are Eagle Scouts. Or Ithaca College. Oh my God, I've got a relative who went to Cornell. Those types of things. That's how you kind of look at their profile, and you're going to see things that are going to jump out and going to be similarities. I had one lady a couple of weeks ago who is a veteran, who was in the Army. She's now in graphic design, but she was in the Army in Fort Benning, I believe it's called. and she was a parachute, I don't know the proper terminology, but developer, or she was the one who would stuff the parachutes for the people or the paratroopers that would jump out of the planes, either for practice or otherwise. I had to ask her about that. How did you get picked for that job? And it started a great conversation. She also said in that conversation, wow, you really did your homework. Yep, I did.
Someone has just alerted me that the chat has been disabled. So please post your questions in the question and answer box. And Scott wants to say thank you. That was the answer that he was looking for. Thank you, Rob.
Excellent.
Any more questions? Okay, Rob, this has been a delightful, informative, enjoyable, and very helpful discussion today. And I'd just like to thank you. And I would just like to give a reminder to the audience that next Wednesday, May 12th at noon, we will welcome Laura Powers, an executive career coach, who will talk on self and career assessment, the foundation of an effective job search campaign. Please go to the Westport Library website to register and for more information on future business programs. I would just ask one more time, any more questions for Rob? Okay, that's a wrap. Thank you again, Rob.
Thank you very much, Ellen. Thank you.
All right, folks, have a great day. Bye-bye.